Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. I'm pleased to be joined today by one of my favorite broadcasters out there, none other than Dave Jageler, one of the radio voices of the Washington Nationals. He's been there for 15 years. Before that, he's had a tremendous career traveling all over the East Coast. Dave, it's such a great pleasure to be joined today by a World Series champion broadcaster.
Hey, Billy, thank you. Good to be on with you.
So, Dave, I wanted to start off with what have you been up to this offseason? I mean, obviously we're in a pandemic, so it's a more unique offseason than what you're used to. But the season of silence, as you've been calling it, what have you been up to?
Well, with the Nationals not being in the postseason this year, I've been watching that a lot. Just try to stay safe and stay healthy. So a fairly normal off season. I mean, last year the off season turned out to be a heck of a lot longer because the season didn't start until late July. So it was a short season, a very unusual one. But the off season's been normal. Just enjoying watching the postseason games and happy that Major League Baseball's gotten to this point. I think when we started the season on July 23rd, it was probably the people around the game thought less than a 50% chance we'd get to this point. But obviously they're in the bubble in the postseason. They're going to get to the finish line and they're going to crown a champion, which is a heck of an accomplishment.
For sure. Definitely all glad that we've been able to make it to the World Series. Let's go back to the early days. You're a native of New England. How'd you get interested in broadcasting?
Well, I mean, to me, it's been a lifelong passion of just being a sports fan. And when I was younger, I kind of gravitated toward listening to different announcers and kind of analyzing them, critiquing them, if you will. So it's something that I knew I wanted to do from a fairly young age, and was fortunate to be able to get some experience doing some broadcasting in high school. So yeah, I mean, it's something I've known I always really wanted to do. I think that was the thing that I was most passionate about as a youngster. So I wanted to be in sports in some capacity. I was smart enough to know that was not going to be as a player at the professional level. So it seemed like either a broadcaster or a sports writer, someone who could cover the game in some capacity, was the next best thing. And to me, the art of doing play-by-play and broadcasting is something that I really studied when I was younger, and am fortunate to be still doing it to this day.
And you went to Syracuse, which is the mecca of sports broadcasting. I mean, you talk about Bob Costas, Marv Albert, among so many others. What was your experience like with the Orange?
Well, I mean, honestly, the experience there was as competitive in many ways as the workforce, getting out into the real world, because, like you say, the school's reputation kind of precedes itself. So everybody who wants to be the next Bob Costas or Marv Albert goes to Syracuse. So the competition just to get on the air at a student radio station is very, very intense. I mean, you go to a school that doesn't have as big a broadcasting program, well, they'll take anybody that will want to go on the air. But here, you have to go through a pretty lengthy process just to get cleared to be on the air to do a sportscast. That's not even talking about doing a game involving the men's basketball team or the football team, which were the plum assignments to do a big Monday game at the Carrier Dome or do a football bowl game. So the upperclassmen kind of controlled the critique process of getting you on the air. And for example, just kind of the depth of talent. When I was a freshman, the guy who was critiquing my sportscast is Ian Eagle, and he's one of the top sportscasters at CBS now. He was 3 years ahead of me, so he was one of the guys, judging whether I'd be on the air or not as a freshman. So it took a long time just to get on the air. And again, that's to do a 2-minute sportscast. And then by the time I was a sophomore, you had to sit at the Carrier Dome and do a mock play-by-play broadcast into a cassette recorder, and that was how you got cleared to do play-by-play. And eventually, I was able to do, as a junior and senior, a bunch of men's basketball games and football games. And when I was a senior, the football team went to the Fiesta Bowl. And one thing about Syracuse, they let the student station go to every home and away game. If they were playing in the Maui Classic, then the broadcasters from the student station would go to Hawaii. And we were at the Fiesta Bowl in Arizona for the bowl game. And then, Big East tournaments when they were in the Big East Conference back in my day, and the NCAA tournament, we did all those games. And so it was a pretty intense process just to get on the air as a student. And that kind of mirrors what you have in the business when you have so many people for every job that's open to try to break in.
And then you obviously have a pretty long career in the minor leagues. You were at Pawtucket, the Red Sox, which has produced so many really good broadcasters out there. And, of course, you've been all over the East Coast. in the Carolina League as well. What was your experience like in minor league baseball?
Well, I mean, honestly, most of my experience was in actually sports radio. My play-by-play experience in baseball was somewhat limited compared to other guys who've gone on to do Major League Baseball. But I did sports talk radio in Charlotte, North Carolina for several years, and then in the Boston market for a few years, and did more basketball play-by-play than baseball. I did a handful of minor league games when I was down in Charlotte with the AAA team in the International League. And then, I mean, kind of the big move for my career was going to Pawtucket. And that's when I basically jumped off the talk radio path and into the play-by-play path as a full-time minor league announcer. And as you say, Pawtucket has been a real launching pad for major league broadcasters. I think by my latest count, of the 30 big league teams, 9 of the 30 teams have an announcer in their booth who was at Pawtucket at some point in their career. So that's been kind of the place to be. And the reason for that, I mean, honestly, a lot of minor league franchises, at least in my time there, they looked at the position as a sales position who happened to do games. At Pawtucket, they looked at it as a play-by-play position. They didn't care if they wanted you to sell, but it wasn't like they were going to fire you if you didn't sell. They wanted the best broadcaster and the best broadcast available. And that's how they judged who they wanted to hire. And obviously, I think their hiring procedure has worked, considering what a long line of guys. I mean, after I left, 2 or 3 other guys have gone to the major leagues who came after me. So they've continued to really have a good pipeline of big league announcers come through there.
I wanted to go to a specific moment in your career. As you know, I'm a Virginia Tech student, so most of my audience will be from Virginia Tech. You have a connection to the Hokies that a lot of people don't know about. And in fact, we also have a mutual friend in Bill Roth. So what's your connection to the Hokies?
Yeah, I mean, that was a long time ago, and kind of a brief stopover on the Hokie network. In fact, my first job, actually, I mean, the hardest job to get is the first job out of Syracuse University, and Bill was able to kind of help me get in touch with people in Morgantown, West Virginia. And actually, kind of like, I mean, the lesson I always give young people who want to get into broadcasting is that networking is so important. And I mentioned that I got to do the Fiesta Bowl when I was a senior at Syracuse. And I met the guy who was doing the network radio broadcast for the Fiesta Bowl, who was named Tony Caridi. And Tony happened to work in Morgantown, West Virginia, and is currently the West Virginia Mountaineers voice. He was not at the time, but was doing network play-by-play. And I introduced myself. He was a Syracuse guy as well. Well, I made that connection, and Tony was the one who basically helped bring me down to Morgantown. And I had met Bill when I was a student at Syracuse. And at that point, in Morgantown, the Virginia Tech network was actually run out of Morgantown, West Virginia. I don't know if it still is, but back then it was. And so, Bill would do the games from Blacksburg or wherever the Hokies were playing, and the signal would be beamed back to Morgantown, and the group in Morgantown would provide a studio engineer and a studio host. And one year I got to be the studio host on the Hokies network with Bill on the basketball side of things. And then from that point, Bill actually helped me connect with the program director at the All Sports Station in Charlotte, which was how I got my launch from Morgantown to Charlotte, where I stayed for 7 years. So meeting Tony Caridi in Tempe, Arizona, and then Bill helped me get my second job. So everywhere along the line, networking has been a key part of making that step. And so that season with the Hokie Network was very valuable because of what Bill did for my career.
Certainly the big takeaway from that is Bill Roth, the great guy. He's doing so much for broadcasters all over the business. Obviously, the way that I know you and most people know you is one of the voices of the Washington Nationals. You have worked with Charlie Slows for 15 years. How important is that relationship? Because really a lot of people, I guess, don't really think about it. For most of the year, you guys are probably spending more time with each other than your own family. So how important is it to develop that relationship and develop a good chemistry on air?
Well, I mean, that's a true statement about the time you spend together. And it all depends on the style of broadcast that you want to have. I mean, when you listen back to the guys who did games in the 50s, when they had 2 separate broadcasters, a lot of times one guy basically wouldn't say anything. It was the play-by-play announcer who did his innings, and then he'd step aside, and the other play-by-play guy would do his innings, and never the two shall meet. Well, I mean, there's some guys who still broadcast that way, but I think kind of the way you want it now, with a lot of teams putting an ex-player in the booth to provide analysis and occasional play-by-play, is that you want to have a conversational broadcast. And it's not just describing the action on the field, but there's so much downtime in baseball. You want to have the ability to to be able to tell a story and keep the listener engaged, even if the game is not going well. And part of that is the banter back and forth between the broadcast partners. So it's very helpful to me if you like the guy you're working with, because over a long season, it's tough to fake that if you really don't like the guy you're working with. So that's important. I think it builds a connection with the fans, because I mean, normally, baseball on the radio is a one-way medium. I mean, the broadcasters are talking to listeners, and the listeners can't talk back to us. But if you have a conversation with your partner, it's almost like the listener's the third party listening in as part of the conversation. They're not going to be able to talk and add to the conversation that way, but they feel like they're part of the conversation. And so to me, that's an important thing to engage your listeners, especially when the game can get dull. That's when you really earn your money, is when the games are not good. It's easy to do, the wild card game that's a one-run game in the 8th inning. Those games, you're not going to do a whole lot of storytelling or messing around or talking about different tangents of things. You're focused on the game, because that's the thing. But over 162 game season, you're going to get a bunch of games that aren't competitive or might be slow paced. And that's when you've got to make the broadcast interesting, even if the game might not be that interesting at that point.
Speaking of, coming up with stories and making the broadcast interesting, how do you prep for each game? I mean, over the course of a 162 game season, how do you find those interesting stories, keep the audience engaged with some interesting feedback?
Well, I mean, it's really, there's kind of two elements to it. I mean, the first happens before the series ever occurs. And I don't know that everybody does this around the league, but I believe in it, and Charlie does too. I do a whole lot of preparation on the other team. And that is just biographical information. If it's for a pitcher, the repertoire, what he throws, how hard is his slider, what's his fastball percentage. I like to find out those kind of things. So whenever the other team brings in a player, whether it's a pinch hitter or a new pitcher, every player's got a story of how they got to the major leagues. And some guys are the number one pick. Some guys are undrafted free agents who have crazy stories to get to the major leagues. There was a guy on the Marlins this year who was a 30-year-old rookie who was an Olympic speed skating medalist. So every guy has a unique story, whether he's on the Nationals or another team. And to me, I like to be able to bring those stories to light. Now, if the situation, if they're bringing in a relief pitcher and it's bases loaded, 2 outs, that's not the time to go into his career history. You're calling the game. But if a pitcher is in there for any length of time, then you weave in those elements. So that's one part of it, is that preparation that you do before the series ever happens, so that you have some basic information on all the players on both teams. But then, and 2020 made this impossible. The other form of preparation you get is in the clubhouse and around the batting cage. And that's when you get to know your own team and their backstories, and you get to talk strategy. You get to interact with the coaches and the manager to talk about different game scenarios and just kind of what's going on with the team at that moment. Now in 2020, no broadcaster on any team or any media person was allowed anywhere near any players or managers. We were not allowed in the clubhouse. We were not allowed on the field. We did not travel with the team. So there were a handful of players on the 2020 Nationals that I have yet to meet. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling. And it makes me feel like I was missing something. Now you try to fake it the best you can, but that element of our preparation was sorely missed in 2020. And I hope we get it back in 2021. We'll see how that goes.
I have to ask you about the World Series run. First of all, I was so happy for guys like you and Charlie and Bob Carpenter and FP Santangelo and Johnny Holiday and those guys who have endured the season where the team wasn't very good. I think of 08 and 09 when the team won 59 games, the playoff collapses in 2012 and 2014 in particular. To witness that run and moments which you got to call, both the Howie Kendrick home runs, you got to see Juan Soto's big hit in the wild card game, the World Series, NLCS domination. I mean, what was that like for you to get to call that World Series run?
Well, I mean, it was the highlight of my career to this point. I mean, seeing, because we had never been there, and it made it more special because of how long that I've been associated with the organization and the steps that went into it along the way. I mean, when I first joined the team in 2006, they were they didn't even have an owner at that point. They were still owned by MLB. The Lerner family would take over later that year. And in many ways, they were kind of like an expansion team. So the World Series seemed like a pipe dream at that point. So you think about those teams, and then for a couple of years being the worst team in the league, to drafting some superstars, and then the postseason heartbreak. So yeah, you think about that journey all along. But I mean, as a professional, you've got to do the best job that you can. And so I enjoyed being in those big moments, to be able to call the games that are being watched all around the country. And as I was telling myself going through it, you know what, I finally, it was I really wanted to broadcast a World Series game. I'm finally getting to do it. I'm okay. Even if they lose, at least I can always say I got a chance to broadcast the World Series. So I told myself at the time, but it was a whole lot more fun to see them win in the end, and then get to enjoy the parade and the celebration that followed. And it makes it even more special considering what we went through over the last year. I mean, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Nationals winning the World Series, and it seems like so much longer than a year ago, because that was our last broadcast that mattered, with fans in the stands. And it just, the things that you kind of took for granted, we really missed over the 2020 season. A friend of mine does the Braves, and he had been with Milwaukee and Atlanta, and he had never done a game beyond the division series because the teams he'd associated with had never advanced past the division series round. This year, the Braves made the league championship series, but he broadcast those games in Atlanta. So it was almost like, yeah, he got to do the LCS, but he didn't really get to do the LCS. There was something missing by not being there this year, and just fortunate that we got to experience it, and it happened when it did, because it would not have been the same thing for me personally and professionally had my first LCS and World Series experience been this year with, as it were, limited fans or no travel. It would not have been the same as it turned out to be in the situation last year.
Everybody's going to ask you about the games. Oh, what was it like to call this moment? I wanted to ask you, what was it? Is there any particular moment you think of? Maybe it might not have been behind the mic, just that whole experience that you really, remember when you think about that World Series run?
Well, I mean, for me, the number one call, that I was on the play-by-play for was the first Kendrick home run, the grand slam against the Dodgers. And I even put that ahead of the home run in Game 7, simply because at that point in the franchise trajectory, they had never been beyond the division series. And at that point, they were the sizable underdog. I mean, they were kind of playing with house money, considering that they had been 19-31, a long shot to even make the postseason. Then they win the wild card game, and the Dodgers are heavily favored, and they're down 3-1 in the 8th inning, kind of miraculously tie the game. And when Howie hit that home run, it was kind of like just they burst through. They finally broke through, and to do it in that manner, and with the way I made the call, I was really happy with it, the way it came out. That to me was the number one moment that I'll always look back on. And obviously they had a great run through the LCS and then the World Series. The difference with the Kendrick home run in Game 7 was that was in the 7th inning, and it gave them a 1-run lead. There was still a lot of baseball to go, and there was still a chance that they were going to, the Astros could have come back, in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning. When Kendrick hit the grand slam and put 4 runs on the board, you kind of knew that was the moment they were going to win the series. There was not much doubt at that point. There was still a lot to happen, as it turned out, when Kendrick hit the home run off the foul pole. But with the benefit of hindsight, that's obviously the winning hit and another special moment. But you knew at the time the Kendrick grand slam was a monumental moment. To that point, the Nationals' greatest moment probably had been the Jason Worth home run, which was a walk-off home run in the division series. The problem was that was a walk-off homer in Game 4. It only extended the series, and they ultimately did not win the next night. So I would always kid Jason, we're going to knock you off the number, we're going to get you off the number 1 slot eventually. And he's like, yeah, please do. And fortunately, Kendrick knocked Jason down a couple of pegs.
So you go from the highlight of your career to this season, which was probably the most unique experience you've had to deal with, not traveling with the team, all of these COVID restrictions in the middle of a pandemic, trying to play a season. I mean, how can you describe what the experience was like to call games this season?
Well, I mean, very, very challenging, and something I hope we don't have to do again. I mean, it was kind of a two-pronged challenge. Number one, when you broadcast games on the radio, the crowd is an essential element of that experience. Because if you listen as a listener to a radio broadcast, the crowd will often react before the announcer tells you what happens. Like there's a certain sound the crowd makes when a ball's hit and it's going to be a home run and it's going to be a no doubt home run. The crowd is going to tell the listener that fact even before the announcer can say that. And so we missed the energy of the crowd and just the reaction to things that happen. And sometimes there's the reaction of a crescendo of noise, but then a groan when the ball's caught at the warning track. The crowd always, I mean, in a way, you could listen with no announcers at all to the radio and know what's happening if you just know who the home crowd is and whether the home team's batting. The home crowd will tell you if something good happened or something bad happened. So we missed that because, and while they did a good job of pumping in artificial noise, it wasn't the same. And it may have sounded pretty close to it on the radio. If you didn't know any better, it wasn't the same for us. And then the second challenge was actually broadcasting a game that you're not attending. So the home games were fine. The road games were tough because we were sitting there at Nationals Park when the team was in Atlanta or New York or Philly or wherever they may be. And we had a big TV monitor, and we had multiple camera shots. We had the center field camera shot that was on TV. We had the high home camera that shows the entirety of the field. We had bullpen cameras. We had a scoreboard camera. So we had plenty of cameras. But when you're calling the game off the center field camera and the ball's hit at 100 miles an hour and it's a low line driver ground ball, by the time the camera switches, you're too late. What's happened has already happened. Either the ball's, for example, into left field for a hit, the third baseman has fielded it, or maybe he's booted it. Or maybe the ball, as happened to me one time, maybe the ball hit the third base bag and bounded over the shoulder of the third baseman, and you don't know that until you see a replay 30 seconds later. So it just makes you appreciate how much quicker your eyes are when you're watching it unfold and how you can describe that more quickly than the TV can switch. So it was just a different style of broadcasting, and it led to mistakes, inadvertent mistakes, but just not kind of accurately describing what was happening, just because the TV couldn't show you accurately what was happening. So it was a frustrating way to call the game.
Well, let's hope we get back to more normal proceedings in 2021. What's your favorite place to travel on the road, whether it's to call a game at the actual ballpark, to experience the city? Do you have a one particular place or maybe a couple places you really like to go anytime you guys travel?
Well, I mean, that was the tough part of this year, not getting to travel, because that to me is the fun part of the job, going to the different cities and the different ballparks to experience that atmosphere. And while it's a very tough place to work, I love going to Wrigley Field just because of the history of it. And Chicago's a great city. I mean, I always look at the schedule and I hope that a weekend series is at Wrigley, because that means you get Friday day game, Saturday day game, Sunday day game, which means you get Friday night and Saturday night to go out and have dinner in Chicago. A midweek series, not as much fun because you're generally working at night. But Chicago for a weekend series is really top of the list. And there are a lot of great ballparks to work. Philadelphia is a really good place to work, kind of as far as our setup, one of the best places to work. San Francisco is a beautiful ballpark to broadcast from. I love the parks kind of out west, San Diego, kind of the neighborhood ballpark feel, being able to walk to the yard there. I like some of the parks in the American League we don't get to go too much. Seattle's got a great ballpark. We went to Target Field for the first time in 2019. I really love that place. Kansas City's got a great view. You're down close. Fenway, obviously, I grew up a Red Sox fan, the history of it. I love going there. So there are not many places I don't like to go. There are a couple, but there are more places I like to go than not.
My final question for you, Dave, is actually a two-part question. One, what do the Nats have to do to get back to contention in the 2021 season? We've seen they've made some changes on the coaching staff, and of course, they'll probably have to make some decisions on some important players. And then part two is, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I mean, you're a World Series, champion broadcaster now. You've done so many things in the business already. Are you content? Is there anything you think you might want to try out in 10 years? So I guess big picture on the Nationals and yourself.
Well, I mean, for the Nationals, I think they were a veteran team in 2019, and they tried that formula again in 2020, which a veteran team didn't really play well for the shortened season, the compressed nature of it. So I think they're kind of a team in transition now. Do they want to be that veteran team again, or do they want to get younger in certain positions? So I think they have a lot of decisions to make and some holes to fill. Starting pitching has been the real key to their organization. They've got a couple of openings there that they really need to address. They have some decisions to make as far as contract options, which could open up some positions. So, they have some core pieces there with Juan Soto and Trey Turner in the lineup, and with Scherzer for another year, Strasburg hopefully coming back, Corbin. You've got some pieces, you've got some bullpen arms, but they really need to fortify in and around it to make the lineup deeper. I think what you've seen in the postseason, be it with the Braves or the Dodgers, deep lineups, 1 through 9, anybody in that lineup can hurt you. And the Nationals did not have that over the course of the season. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And Mike Rizzo's got a checklist that he's going to try to knock off one by one, as far as be it free agency or the possibility of trades. So I think it's going to be a very active offseason. As far as me personally, there is no higher league than the major league. So I could easily see myself in the same chair 10 years from now. The one thing that I would really like to do that I don't do now is I would love to be involved in doing postseason games, even when the Nationals aren't there. Potentially on the network level, on radio. ESPN radio is the outlet for that. That'd be one thing I'd love to do in my career, is to be able to do postseason every year, even if the Nationals aren't in it. Ideally, I'd love to be the lead announcer. I mean, technically I'm the number 2 announcer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every lead announcer position appeals to me. The grass isn't always greener, and the Nationals are, it's been a very good place to work for these years. So I'm not bound and determined to leave just for any old position. If there was an opportunity to be a lead announcer, I would at least consider it. But for the most part, I think if I had to lay a wager, 10 years from now, I'll probably be in the very same seat. And that's not a bad thing. There's nowhere else to get promoted to. So, when you have these jobs, you want to hold on to them for as long as you can. And guys have, there's something to be said to have that longevity in one place. I mean, we all aspire to be Vin Scully, 67 years in the same spot. I started a little too late, I think, to make that happen, starting in my 30s with the Nationals. But it doesn't say a lot about you to be moving around to job. There's something about that familiarity that the listeners appreciate. So if I were to go somewhere else, I'd have to start over from square one. Whereas for 15 years, Nats fans have, for better or worse, gotten to know me, and they know what they have with Charlie and I. So there's a generation of fans that we're all that they've known. So there's something pretty special about that.
Well, I personally hope that you and Charlie are together forever, and you're with the Nationals for the foreseeable future. Dave, I can't thank you enough for your time. For those who don't know, me and Dave have communicated over the past few years, and he's always been very gracious with his time, including today. Dave, I can't thank you enough for joining me.
Okay, Billy, have a good one.
That's Dave Jageler, Washington Nationals broadcaster. This has been the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm Billy Parvatam. Thanks so much for joining us, folks, and we'll see you next time.